Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. I join with my colleagues in the Liberal Party. We're not confident in this government. We're not confident in the Premier. That's why we've moved the motion. And it's all very well and good for, somewhat offended and uptight Labor and Green MPs to take issue with the fact that the opposition has even raised this motion. Well, what else are we supposed to do to give expression and to give voice for the people of Tasmania who are being let down? What, would you have us bring in a little petition? What, would you have us run a Facebook page? No, we'll use the forms of the House to give voice to the many thousands of people in communities across Tasmania who have been let down by the decisions that are being made by people in this room. Not decisions that are made in this room, I should say, not decisions that are made in this chamber, no, made by people who find their government support in this chamber. And the difference is important. The difference is very important, Mr Deputy Speaker, because this parliament has not had a say in this process. This parliament has been left behind. If this is the democratic home to give voice and expression to the people of Tasmania, as we all know, it has been comprehensively bypassed. Democratic process, the ability for proper representation of the people of Tasmania as the true owners and custodians of our state-owned forests, it has been bypassed by a series of events that have all happened behind closed doors. That is why the opposition has moved this motion, and I support it entirely. And isn't it interesting that the Greens, from the first opening bout yesterday, when this motion was brought forward, Mr McKim, as leader of the Greens, his opening saying was that this is a motion of no consequence. That's because, as he said, it will go the way of all of the other motions of no confidence. The Greens will support the Labor Party. The Greens will continue to sustain this party. Why is that, I wonder? Well, it's because they are entirely stuck with each other. They might not have wanted this situation a year and a half ago, although the Greens probably did, because we know that from what came through of the WikiLeaks overnight, that the Greens were secretly harbouring support for Labor anyway, but that's immaterial today. The issue is that the Greens and the Labor Party need each other. They need to cling to each other to struggle through this difficult time. But it's a time which is much more difficult for people across Tasmania who have no voice, except at this time the Liberal Party in this parliament and hopefully the independents in the other place. The motion, very importantly, opens with one of the most important and fundamental arguments that shows why this government has compromised its integrity, and it's a very important point, and that is that Labor have comprehensively broken their pre-election promise to continue their support for the Regional Forest Agreement. That's what they said. Now, in Canberra, there's a massive debate going on about a new tax, the carbon tax, because it's based on a lie. The carbon tax is based on a lie. Julia Gillard, when she became leader of the Labor Party federally, and with just days before the election was actually to be held, it was in the week before the election, she said, as we all know, there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead. That's what she said. And before our Tasmanian state election, what did Labor say? What did Labor say before the last state election? They said that they would continue their support for the Regional Forest Agreement. They didn't just say they'd continue to support the RFA, they said that they'd actually go a step further and renew it. What they said in March 2010 in their forestry policy, this is what they said. This is what, of the two Labor members who are actually in here at the moment, Mr Bacon from Denison and Ms White from Lyons, this is the platform, and Mr... Welcome the attorney from my colleague in Bass. These three members, like myself, were all elected for the first time to this place in March 2010. And so now this, what I'm about to read, is the platform upon which Mr Whiteman, Mr Bacon and Ms White were elected. This is the platform they were elected upon. Labor will immediately negotiate with the Australian government to renew the RFA and to provide industry with ongoing long-term security through the provision of rolling agreement renewals following each 5-year review of the RFA. I continue. A further 20-year evergreen RFA will provide industry with the what? With the security necessary for ongoing investment generating wealth for the Tasmanian economy into the future. Now, that was under Team Bartlett. Now, Mr Bartlett's gone. But these 3 members are still here. There's 7 colleagues in Labor who are not present at the moment. They were elected under this platform. And what's the value of this platform? It's not worth the paper it's written on. And that's why it's a fundamental breach of trust with the Tasmanian community. Interestingly, the Liberal Party members, and I include myself, we also were elected on a very similar platform, different form of words, same intent. In fact, I think it may have been the case that we initiated these kind of statements in terms of our support for the Regional Forest Agreement. So in fact, 20 members of this Parliament, of this House, were elected on that platform, or words to the same effect. Just 5 took the anti-forestry approach. So what's changed? What's changed in the meantime? Why is this government compromised? Is it because of something that's occurred in the last 16 months that's caused them to need to chuck that promise out? No. The change that occurred was the one that occurred when this government formed power together as a coalition between Labor and the Greens. This is not leadership. This is not leadership of the Premier. It's certainly not the Labor Party leading Tasmania. It's the Labor Party following. They are following the Green Masters. And it's clear for anyone to see. Tasmanians recognise it. We in the opposition recognise it. Now, I come back to the point. If 20 members out of 25 were elected on a platform of supporting the forest industry, genuinely giving it resource security in a way that will generate, what were the words? For ongoing investment, generating wealth for the Tasmanian economy. Why is it that the 20 members of this House couldn't have combined and supported the forest industry in a very meaningful and proper way? But no, the members of this House, in the Labor Party particularly, they have broken their promise. It's probably fair to say, as much as I hate the Greens' forest policy, at least they've stayed true. At least people...
Stop there.
No, that's not fair. I don't hate the Greens. I don't hate any member of this House. But I do hate the Greens' forest policy. But let me say this, before the Labor members get a bit too smug, at least the Green members are actually acting in the Parliament in a way that people would expect them to have. And that's the difference. People who voted Green at the last election, 2 groups, the dark Greens, you know, the ones who do want to destroy the forest industry, and so they'll vote Green so that they can get expression of their view that forestry in Tasmania is not a legitimate industry. Fair enough, they'll vote Green and they'll get their voice heard. Then there are the light Greens, the ones who might be traditionally Labor or Liberal voters. You know, sometimes they get accused of being the doctors' wives, whatever. They might think, well, I'm a bit sick of the major parties. I don't like them for this or that reason, or I don't like their leader, or I don't like their policy on this or that. So what we might do is we might give the Greens a go. Because what did Mr McKim, as leader of the Greens, say before the last election? He told the people of Tasmania that a vote for the Greens is a what? It's a safe vote. And so people, at least when they vote Green, at least they might say, well, you know, the way that Ms O'Connor and Mr McKim have acted with regard to forestry, at least they might have known, well, that's what you get when you vote Green. But what about the other people? What about the blue-collar workers? What about the everyday Tasmanians who choose to vote Liberal or Labor under a platform of pro-jobs? They're being let down because now it's only 10 out of 25 members, a minority of members of this House, are actually now supporting them and staying true to their word that was made before the election. This deal is bad for Tasmania. It's only good for one group of people, and it's the people I'm looking at across the chamber. It's only good for Labor and Green politicians. It's not good. It's not good for anyone else. The previous Premier and the current Premier have made a deliberate decision during these processes to actually abrogate their responsibility to lead a properly functioning government to make decisions about the future of Tasmania and our state-owned assets. The previous Premier and the current Premier, together with the Resources Minister, they've dropped the ball in a very deliberate fashion. They've handed these decision-making opportunities to unelected, unaccountable people to make deals behind closed doors and to have negotiations which are outside the view of the public. Now, this debate that we are having today, of course, many people across Tasmania, they're busy with their own lives, looking after their families, and they're going to work and getting on with what they do. But nonetheless, everything that occurs in here, this speech I'm giving, the speech that will follow me, the votes and proceedings that occur, everything is on the public record. It's all available for the community to see. Stands in stark contrast to what Labor and the Greens have engineered over the last year. It's a terrible abuse of power, and for this agreement, which has been struck in the fashion I've been describing, to be now talked about as the subject of an agreement between the state and federal governments, it still hasn't even come to this parliament. Now, how does that sit with those of you who are listening to this? How does that sit with you, that we could sign up to such a substantial agreement that deals with dispossessing thousands of people of their jobs, dispossessing the Tasmanian economy of a $700 million per annum industry of real turnover in state product, and it still has not come to this place, the home of our democratic tradition and the home of decision-making. It has not come here for a proper scrutiny debate, and we still have not voted on it. But I know that Ms O'Connor, look, you know, I at least appreciate, one thing I do appreciate about Ms O'Connor's position here is that at least she's consistent. I think she's got a fantastic deal, by the way, and the Greens. They've got the best deal of all here.
Yeah,
but so, you know, as much as I don't like their forest policy, as much as I detest the way that they are prepared to consign people to the scrap heap in advance of their ideological goals, at least that's what we expected. But Tasmanians expect more of their Labor members, and that's why they're getting the hiding that they are at the moment. Making last-minute changes to the proposed intergovernmental deal, it was solely in order to appease their Green political masters. We saw when the first blush of the so-called agreement was published that Nick McKim, with Bob Brown's hand on his shoulder, virtually, if you like, virtually I say, you know, they were standing out in the foyer of the Parliament here on the ABC News that night, explaining why they won't be supporting the forest deal. But just weeks later, they're now enthusiastic supporters. That's because they finally got their wicked way. And bypassing even the dodgy process where some people had signed up for it and given their support for it, the Greens went to the Premier. They obviously said, look, this is obviously going to be a matter of serious import for us. We'll probably punish you for this. We might even withdraw our support over this. And so they got an even better deal.
The IGA in detail.
Willfully disregarding the peer-reviewed advice of your government's own agency. Now, Ms O'Connor, who is a Minister of the Crown, she's a Minister of this government. She also, while she's not the Minister for Forestry or Minister for Resources, she's still a part of the Cabinet. Now, Forestry Tasmania is an instrumentality of this government. It's an instrumentality of this Parliament. But, you know, the IGA deliberately and willfully disregards the advice that's been received by FT. And that, again, brings into question the integrity or lack of behind these sorts of decision-making. Now, as the Leader of the Greens has now, I'm sure he's been busy, but now he's here, I'll repeat again for the benefit of the Leader. At least the Greens are actually attempting to agitate and achieve the things that they, you know, that the voters of Tasmania would expect them to. So I don't agree with the Leader of the Greens' attitude on forestry, I don't, but there's nothing new there. But at least the Greens are fighting with their 5 members out of 25. At least they're doing what the Green voters would think they would do, and indeed a majority of voters would think that they would do. And that's why, nonetheless, they must have thought all their Christmases have come at once, to have had this opportunity to take and exploit the fact that there was a hung parliament, to feed confidence to a weak government, and to provide it with ongoing confidence on the basis that they will do what they're told. Now, Mr McKim will probably never admit to that, but he'd probably give it away by his grin, because I reckon that's what's happening here, and that's what Tasmanians are on. They're onto your strategy, and it's working beautifully for you, but that doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's right at all. And if you think that's wrong, then why don't you say so later on? Also, Mr Speaker, the motion deals with the fact that the Premier has engaged herself in a process which is said ad nauseum to be a recipe for peace. Well, that's not true. This deal does nothing to provide peace, and that now overused saying of having peace in our time. Well, I'm for peace. I'm all for it. What a great notion. But if you want to talk about peace, what about Hey, here's a crazy idea. What about people obeying the law? How about that for a peaceful society? How about if we have laws and rules that we're all expected to obey? How about we ask people to obey the law? What about that?
Apartheid was a legal framework.
I can't believe a Minister of the Crown is now trying to bring in apartheid as some sort of excuse as a member of this parliament with an opportunity to bring in law and debate them. We're in a privileged position here. Just 25 people out of our 500,000 get the opportunities that we have to make and amend and scrutinise law. And you would lower that. You would lower that by chucking in that was an obnoxious thing to say, what you just did, to say that apartheid was a law and that somehow that excuses people across Tasmania to go and break the law. I think that's really regrettable that we'd hear that from a minister. I'm really disappointed with that. If you want peace in our time, what about you asking me and me asking you to obey the law and to respect it? And if the law's no good, change it. But we should agree at least on that people should obey and respect the law. We're a free country. We're a democracy. We've got all of these proud traditions that have to be defended. But one thing that I do expect of my fellow Tasmanians is that they won't break the law, and if they do, they should accept the consequences. And not just that, I'll go further. When people break the law, of course there's a proper process. Government ministers should reinforce the law and that the law should be obeyed. I'll say that again. When the law is broken, and if there's an allegation made or if there's obvious evidence that somebody's breaking the law because of their political goals, every government minister, when asked, every MP, when asked, should clearly state that they don't support people breaking the law and that they shouldn't do it. We haven't seen that in Tasmania. We have not seen that. We have not seen every minister being willing to say that. That's very disappointing. How can that contribute? How can that situation contribute to peace in our time when even the government doesn't tell people in Tasmania that they should obey the law? None of us in this chamber are above the law. I know that if I broke the law, there'd be no quarter given, neither should there be. We should all be treated equally under the law. Why is it then that even some of us here who are in, as I say, that privileged position, why don't we support that in every possible way? Why did the Premier falsely claim that the deal that she's now part of and implicated in, why did she claim that 155,000 cubes of saw log per year could be guaranteed? Why did she say that 265,000 cubes of peeler billets would be guaranteed each year, when even now her coalition partner is saying that they won't give any guarantees on that score either? Why? I mean, they have said. I mean, it's obvious that the Labor Party are actually depending now on the Liberals. That's what it looks like. You'll be depending on us to deliver your promises, but you've got this compromised problem here, and you're making a lot of assumptions. Because Tasmanians are getting a very bad deal from you, but you see, the Greens will only take and take. You know, there's that old saying, you take with one hand and give with the other. Well, the Greens will take with one hand and they will take with the other. So having secured as best a result as they can get, they're now actually not even willing to support some of the principles that are part of that, not even prepared to support it. And the Premier is now not able to give those guarantees that she's talked about. And locking up forests across Tasmania is certainly not the answer for the Tasmanian economy. It's absolutely not the right thing to do. Now, this IGA is about spoiling Tasmania. It's about damaging our economy. But for what reason? It's for political survival. It's about this government holding on to power based on its tenuous links between Labor and Greens. It won't deliver peace, and we've already seen that in just today's Mercury. There was a long and thoughtful piece from Vicar Bailey, and he says that given conflict and controversy over logging, our forests and the community aspirations to see them protected, the quality of the peace is directly related to the quality of the conservation outcomes that this new agreement delivers. Well, so he says, but it's conditional. He wants the deal, but he's not prepared to guarantee peace to the extent that he's able to. He then goes on to say that totally inconsistent with the notion of peace is a plan to build the new timber industry around the most divisive and controversial project the state has seen in many, many years. And then he says the Tamar Valley pulp mill. So it's not going to work. You know, the people who did sign the Statement of Principles, it certainly wasn't unanimous support by any measure, but for those who did sign up to it, as we all know in this place, they signed on, and one of the key principles was, of course, support for a pulp mill. But now even Mr Bailey, having, together with the ENGOs, having secured the best deal that they possibly could have, you know, they're actually withdrawing from elements of the Statement of Principles. So what confidence should we in this place have? None at all. I would call upon Tasmanians of whatever colour to be loyal to Tasmania and stop sabotaging our economy. Now, if you don't like a particular industry, whether it's forestry or whether it's aquaculture or whether it's mining, if you don't like it, bring it to the Parliament. If you don't like that industry or something that it's doing or the people involved in it, use your rights, exercise your rights. But why travel interstate? Why travel overseas or support that kind of activity which is deliberately designed to tarnish our reputation and harm our markets? The truth is, as we know, that the Greens and their environmental movement organisers in the community, they know how to work, they know how to damage Tasmania's brand, and they've been doing it for decades. When people talk about ending the conflict, I mean, this has been a key problem. And we've seen federal Green senators travel overseas. We've seen Green groups travel to paper manufacturers overseas and dump bags of wood chips on their corporate office floors and receptions. And what do they say? Don't do business with Tasmania. So, look, in response, look, I'd have to agree. There are economic challenges that the Greens can't be blamed for, like the high dollar and world demand. Fine. But why make it worse, as you have continually done now for decades? You don't kick a man when he's down. And that's what the Greens and the Labor Party are now seeking to do. And it's a terrible way to treat your state. It's a terrible thing to do. And you wouldn't support it if Liberal politicians, you'd be angry if Liberal politicians ran around the rest of the world bagging out the Labor-Green government, because of course there is a convention that's always respected in politics, at least between Liberal and Labor, that when you're abroad you speak up your home state or country. That's the right thing to do. So why can't we ask the Greens and their environmental activists to do the same for us? Bring your debates.
That's exactly what
Bring your petitions. Bring your motions. Put your ads in the paper. Have your protest rallies. But obey the law. Obey the law. I've just been called trash. But nonetheless, I'll continue. But obey the law. But obey the law.
Point of order.
But obey the law.
Point of order. I just need the honourable member to understand. I didn't call you trash. I said that your side of politics would trash this island.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. But obey the law and don't ruin our state's fine reputation. I'll challenge, and I don't want an answer, but I'll challenge the Greens and the Labor Party with what happened on Q&A a couple of weeks ago. A few weeks ago, there was a Q&A episode held in Tasmania, and Senator Eric Abetz asked a very good question of Senator Christine Milne. It was an amazing question, and we're all holding our breath waiting for the answer. The question was, Senator, tell me where in the world is forestry done better than here in Tasmania? And can anybody remember what the answer was? No? I'll tell you what the answer was. There was a stony cold silence. Where in the world... Now, is Tasmania perfect? Of course not. Can we improve our forest practices? Always. Should we? Yes. Let's debate it. Bring it on. Let's have the debate. But to answer this, where in the world? Where in the world do they do forestry better than here? Sustainably managing working forests, protecting iconic forests, having state and federal agreements which protect forests on the basis of being, representative, adequate and comprehensive.
And representative.
You see, now where in the world do we have that other than Tasmania? Now, I remember in 2004... Sorry?
Have you been into the Florentine?
I've been to lots of parts of Tasmania, not all of them, but I'm just asking the question. I'm noticing that you're not answering me. Where in the world do they do forestry better than Tasmania? The point here is that, look, we can always do better, but what's most important is getting the balance right. I believe in supporting people and employment and an economy that we can all be proud of. If you think you've got an environmental issue, bring it forward. But I will remember when I first stood for Parliament in 2004, it was in an incredible crucible of debate around forestry. In fact, it was a national debate. What's my time looking like?
You've still got about another 5, yeah.
It was a crucible around forestry debate. The big capital cities around Australia, the Howard government and the Latham opposition were absolutely keeping an eye on the potential Green vote. They certainly were. And particularly in the capital centres, there were posters going up everywhere. The Wildos had a massive, if you like, extra bit of activity. There were signs up. People wanted to see an end to old growth logging in Tasmania. Now, that's a throwaway line, but that's what they wanted. They came from states, New South Wales, Victoria in particular, to a lesser extent Queensland. They came from states which had nowhere near the level of protection that Tasmania has by past generations' decisions made to protect our forests. And in a way it was a perverse situation that people in capital centres around Australia were wanting to feel good about something that occurs in somebody else's state. And really, to be truthful, there were many people who wanted to feel good about locking up Tasmania without any concern, as Howard said at the time, without any concern for the future of regional communities. And that's the context for then the decisions that took place with Mark Latham and supported by his then member in Bass, Michelle O'Byrne, so not new for her to be selling out the forest industry. And that is also why the Labor government then, under Paul Lennon, rejected the deal, and so did Australians. But it's also why John Howard, and I've talked about this in my first speech, it's why, even though he was contemplating a greener policy, it's why ultimately he couldn't bring himself to do it, because he said to the minister that I referred to, he said, "But I just can't do it to those families." And that is what motivates me.
Yeah,
that's what motivates
choices.
the Liberal Party as we approach this debate.
Choices,
if we want prosperity for our community, if we want jobs, if we want to get value out of our natural resources without spoiling them, let us do that. But why should we throw out thousands of people onto the unemployment scrap heap, or to ask them to find jobs in other states, and we'll lose our fellow Tasmanians and we'll lose our opportunities here? Why should we be making these compromised decisions? And there are no winners. There are no winners except the Labor and the Green government. And so, Mr Speaker, in concluding, I'll say that there are many compromised people. There are many compromised people in the upper echelons of the Tasmanian political elite. They have let Tasmania down. They do not have the confidence of this House. And as interestingly enough, that today is the day that polling is released, we see that Labor's vote has crashed, Greens' vote has crashed. Tasmanians are saying they don't appreciate this government, they're not confident in you, and the least the Liberal opposition can do is give proper expression to what those people are thinking and feeling and how they are fearing for their future. That is why this government is standing condemned, but it's a dead man walking, because they'll get their revenge later on, even if it means that they've already had many of their life chances harmed and damaged by the decisions that this dodgy government's been making.